Hi friends, thank you for connecting with me today. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your day. So on next weekend, next Sunday, which would be June 15, is that correct? Is Father's Day? Yes, June 15. We are going to be shutting down our entire Sunday gathering so that we can support the Stouffville Main Street 5K, right? And we've done this every year since the 5K began, I think 3 years ago or something, maybe 4 years ago. And so we're shutting down our entire gathering to serve our community, to volunteer. And the reason is because we love our community and because we want to serve our community, right? And so today I'd like to talk to you for a few moments about what Paul says about serving other people in love. And that's kind of the key thing there, in love. And we'll get back to that in just a second. Okay, so let me just set the context or set the stage here. There are 8 different places where Paul and in one place where Jesus talks about how we are to treat one another, and we call them the one another passages. So in John 13, Jesus said, "I'm giving you a new commandment to love each other, just as I have loved you, so you should love each other." In Ephesians 4, Paul says, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. Earlier in Ephesians 4, Paul says, always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults. Why? Because of love. Love is a key word here. So the message in all of these, what we call one another passages, the message is that we need each other. And this Jesus life is not designed to live in isolation, right? It's designed to live in community. And as we live the Jesus life in community, then we learn how to love each other, we learn how to forgive each other, we learn how to be humble and patient with each other and making allowance for each other's faults. We learn how to live in community through in the Jesus life. Okay, so now we get to our theme for the day. In Galatians 5, Paul talks about serving one another in love. Let me just, before we read that scripture, let me give you a bit of background, a bit of context. So Paul is writing this letter to a group of people over a widespread area in a province of Galatia. Often Paul wrote to cities, and this is written to a wider geographical area in the province of Galatia. And Galatia is in modern-day Turkey. So Paul, the general, I guess, theme of Galatians, Paul is talking about how the Galatians and Jesus followers in general are free from the rules and regulations of religion, right? And so for many of the Galatian Christians, they would have come out of a Jewish system where you just obey these rules, and if you obey these rules, then that is your connection with God. And Paul was saying, no, you don't have to, it's not about obeying the rules to connect with God. It's about living life in the Spirit. And we talked about that last week. Living life in the Spirit that causes our spirits to come alive to God. And there's freedom and there's joy in that, right? And so in Galatians 5:1, Paul says, so Christ has truly set us free. Now make sure that you stay free and don't be tied up again in slavery to the law. Okay? So, but the problem was that some people said, cool, we're free of all those rules and regulations, therefore we can do anything we want. We can live like the devil, and we can ask God to forgive us, and great, but Paul set a boundary there. He set a guardrail there. He said that yes, you're free from kind of the rules, the regulations of the Jewish system, religious system. Yes, you're free from that, but there is a guardrail Paul gives in verses 13 and 14. So in Galatians 5, Paul says, For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Don't go crazy, and this doesn't mean you can live however you want. Here's the key. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. Use your freedom to serve one another in love, for the whole law can be summed up in this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. And so, the message that Paul is giving here is, yes, you're free from religious ritualism, religious rules and regulations, but you're bound by love. And this love compels us to serve people, right? It compels us to serve people. Let me finish up today by looking at this issue of serving other people through a slightly different lens and a different story that we find in Mark chapter 6. Okay, so again, let me just kind of give a bit of context to what's happening here in this story. The story is of Jesus feeding 5,000 men plus women and children out in the countryside. But a bit of background to the story. Jesus has been preparing his disciples for a long time and giving a lot of energy to preparing his disciples for the day that he was going to leave earth and go back to heaven. And the disciples would then have to carry on the message, the good news, the gospel, Jesus's message, right? So he's been preparing them. He's been trying to help them to take on the mantle of leadership and take ownership of serving people with this message. And earlier in Mark chapter 6, Jesus sends the disciples out into the villages to share the good news with people. And it was a bit of a trial run for when Jesus would finally would be gone from earth, that they would have to carry on. And so earlier in Mark chapter 6, they go and they kind of share the message in different villages, and then they come back. And then later in Mark 6, Jesus is out in the countryside with his disciples and with 5,000 men plus women and children. So there are thousands and thousands of people out in the countryside. And there's a problem that arises. Mark 6 verse 35 says that late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat." But Jesus says something really curious and really unexpected. But Jesus said, "You feed them. You do it. You feed them." And they're like, "What?" They say, "But with what?" They asked. "We'd have to work for months to earn enough money to buy food for all these people." And so the disciples are saying to Jesus, just like he always did, "There's a problem. You need to solve it. Jesus, you need to solve it." And Jesus puts it back on the disciples, and he said, "No, you solve it." Right? And Jesus, this I'm sure was a shocking thing for Jesus to say to them. And it kind of raises the question of what's going on here. Why did Jesus, because every other time, in fact, there's another time where Jesus feeds 4,000 and, but every other time Jesus healed the person, Jesus fed the multitudes, Jesus was the one who did it, right? And why did he put it back on the disciples for them to solve it? Well, again, I think part of it is that Jesus was trying to help his disciples to rise to a new level of leadership because he knew that he would be leaving soon, and he was trying to help them take ownership of this miracle. And I think also Jesus was trying to help his disciples to move from, now listen to this, to move from consumers to contributors. Move from consumers to contributors. Up until this point, and earlier in chapter 6 where Jesus sent the disciples out to villages, up until this point, the disciples were observers and consumers of what Jesus was teaching and the miracles that he was doing. But now Jesus is trying to help them transition to move from, like I said, consumers to contributors, to transition from being an observer disciple to a participant disciple to a doer disciple, right? And I kind of, in general, I think that there are 3 levels of problem solving. The first level of problem solving is really easy. It's the person who is able to identify the problem. And everybody can do that, right? I mean, you hear it all over the place in social media. This is wrong, here's the problem, here's the problem. Anybody can identify the problem, right? That's the first level. The second level of problem solving is the person who is able to identify the solution, right? Okay, yeah, here's a problem, but here's a solution. And not fewer people are able to identify solutions. The third level of problem solving is the person who can actually execute on the solution, right? They can identify the problem. They can say, okay, here's what we need to do. Now let's go and do it, right? The person who can actually execute on the solution. And it's interesting when we look at this story through those 3 levels. The disciples identified the problem, like it's getting late, people are hungry, and soon they're going to be hangry. And so there's the problem. And the disciples had a solution, but it was an earthly solution, a human solution. The solution they had was send them away so they can go to the surrounding towns and villages and buy food. But Jesus had a different solution, right? A miraculous solution. And Jesus actually invited them to participate in the miraculous solution. Let me just, but they missed the opportunity, right? Let me just pose a director's cut different ending to this story. The disciples, they're out, 5,000 men plus women and children. Hey, Jesus, it's getting late. We need to these people are going to get hungry. We need to send them away. We need to feed them. And Jesus says, you do it. And instead of being intimidated by that and being like, what? Like, how, what if they said, cool. Here's an opportunity to step up in leadership. Here's an opportunity to actually make a difference. And so last time we saw Jesus bless the loaves and the fish, and so let's try it again, right? Do you think that Jesus would have left them hanging on that? Do you think if they accepted the mantle of responsibility and said, okay, let's try this, that Jesus would have not provided the miracle, or God would have not? I think that they missed a tremendous opportunity, and the story could have been completely different if this time the disciples were the ones who provided the miracle. And this is exactly what Jesus was trying to help them to do. But unfortunately, they missed the opportunity. Friends, my point is this, that every day, Jesus gives you and I an opportunity to provide a miracle in somebody's life. Every day, Jesus gives us an opportunity to serve somebody. And quite often, it's going to be in very tangible, very simple ways. Maybe it'll be just in a friendly greeting, a kind word to somebody, a clerk at a grocery store, or somebody, a neighbor. Or maybe there'll be some tangible way that you'll be able to serve somebody. Or, friends, listen to this. Maybe there's a miracle waiting to happen. And maybe a friend or a coworker or a family member is facing a problem. And maybe you are in a position to help them discover a miracle. And if you were to say to somebody, I'm really sorry that happened, or whatever the situation, would you mind if I pray for you? And maybe you would even pray for them right then and there. Or maybe you would commit over the coming days to pray for the person. Maybe, like the disciples, there's a miracle waiting to happen. And maybe God is waiting for you to be a conduit, to be the active agent, like we talked about last week, in that miracle. But friends, listen to me. My challenge is this. Next Sunday, on Father's Day, we're going to shut down our whole gathering, which is a bit of a selfless thing to do. It is selfless. We don't get to be together and eat food and worship or anything. It's selfless, but we do it so that we can serve, right? And so I wonder if in this next week leading up to, next Sunday, if we would be intentional about looking for people to serve, if we'd be intentional about finding some difference that we can make in the lives of our neighbor, friends, family members, whoever, let's find somebody to serve. And the key in all of this, and we see this reoccurring theme every time, is love. Love, love, love. Because we love our community of Stouffville, we shut down our gathering next week to serve. Because we love our neighbors, we do whatever we need to do to serve them. Love our families. Love is the key in all of this. So yeah, I just encourage you to kind of evaluate your love factor, your love meter, and maybe kind of need to adjust that a little bit. And then out of love, find a way to serve people in our community. Okay? God bless you, friends. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. So when I say next Sunday, I mean a week, like 8 days from now. Tomorrow, if you're watching this on Saturday, which would be June 7. If you're watching this on June 7, we will be gathering tomorrow, June 8. And then, so look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless you, friends.